'Twas a dark day when the ship came to harbor, a ship of death, they say. Aye, a ship that delivered a great pestilence upon these hills, as if by magic. I shall never forget the bodies and the acrid smell of sulphur in the streets, as if from the devil himself. The year of our Lord, 1900.
The Middle Ages were the Bubonic Plague in America.
When you think of the plague, most of us think the Middle Ages. Dark, filthy pits of pestilence, dead in the streets, a horror show of ye olden times.
Dead bodies in the carts, girl, skeletons in the art, girl.
But at the turn of the 20th century, the Bubonic Plague made its way to San Francisco, California, the modern cosmopolitan heart of the American West. A bright new world that nobody believed could fall victim to a disease of another time and another place, until it did. Let's take you back to 1900 in San Francisco's Chinatown. Remember, this was the era of the Chinese Exclusion Act, passed in 1882. The act was the first major US legislation that essentially banned a specific ethnic group by denying immigration and citizenship to all Chinese people. There was already vicious anti-Chinese sentiment, but the Exclusion Act made it much worse. As a note, there's been a real uptick in the comments saying, "I respect you, but please don't make this about race. This is a human story, not a racist story." Listen folks, my hands are a little tied here, because you know which type of stories tend to involve a strong through line of race? Like, all the stories from history. It's not like we're twisting ourselves in knots trying to make fetch happen.
Gretchen, stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
Discrimination largely confined the Chinese people of San Francisco to living in Chinatown. But in 1900, ironically the year of the rat in the Chinese zodiac, I'm a rat, is that bad news for me? What happened in Chinatown did not stay in Chinatown, bursting forth into San Francisco while the whole nation paid attention. Right here on the corner of Grant and Jackson in Chinatown is now a Citibank. But in 1900, it was the Globe Hotel. The Globe Hotel was basically a flop house, 4 stories tall with over 300 people living in it, and some of the worst living conditions in San Francisco. Living in these terrible conditions was 41-year-old Wong Chut-king. Wong lived below street level here in a squalid room with 2 roommates where they shared 1 wooden bed. Sewage was seeping up through the ground, the toilet was a hole in the dirt, and there was a rat-infested sewer pipe running through the room. In February of 1900, Wong became seriously ill. He was at death's door, so his 2 roommates took him away to a coffin shop and funeral home and left him there. Halls of tranquility were, in fact, pungent places where the dead and dying would lay next to their coffins, waiting to go to the cemetery, just biding time until the dying person became a corpse and it was time to go. Wong, a man who had been sending money home to his family in Guangdong, China for 20 years, died alone, delirious, and in pain. This is 806, 813, 817. It would be about right here where the old Wing Sang coffin shop was, where the roommates brought Wong as he was dying. But it just so happened that while Wong's body was here, a city health inspector came by for a routine inspection. And what does he see? This huge black lump on Wong's right groin. And he goes, "This doesn't look good." So he calls in his supervisor, who comes to see the lump and goes, "Oh no." It was a textbook bubo. A little Bubo's 101 here. The bubo is the bubonic plague's calling card. When you're infected, your lymph nodes become swollen and painful to the touch, developing into the plague's signature egg-shaped, pus-filled, bacteria-filled lumps. Those lumps can be found in the groin area, the armpits, on the legs. Where there be lymph nodes, there be buboes. The look of the plague was undeniable. Sores, fever, delirium, the body just evacuating itself. The disease does merciless and efficient battle in a person's body.
You get acronecrosis from the Yersinia pestis, and it makes your tongue a black girl. Gonna bury you out and back, girl.
When the plague bacillus, Yersinia pestis, moves in, it craftily hides itself from the immune system. Shh. It then moves into the lymph nodes and destroys the white blood cells. Before long, the body is teeming with plague and sepsis takes over. Eventually, the internal organs hemorrhage so badly they appear to liquefy. I'll just say that one again. It looks like your internal organs are liquefying. The victim's blood pressure plummets, and then blessedly they descend into a coma, and then death, usually within a few days. Needless to say, an outbreak of the plague in 1900 San Francisco would be disastrous. But this wasn't out of nowhere. What we call the third pandemic, basically the third huge wave of the plague in world history, was already taking place in southwestern China in the late 19th century, with tens of thousands of people dying. Now, it wasn't the 50 million people of the second wave of the plague in the Middle Ages, but it was very bad, and it was already spreading to Hong Kong. The ships that brought immigrant workers to San Francisco came from Guangdong, the province in southern China, often stopping in Hong Kong, and then Honolulu, Hawaii, and then arriving in San Francisco. If the plague made it into San Francisco, it would be no time at all before it spread through North America via the Transcontinental Railroad. Who was gonna stop this from happening? This guy, Joseph Kinyoun. Kinyoun was the rising star bacteriologist in the Western Hemisphere. He had studied with Louis Pasteur, he had been a leading voice in establishing germ theory as a legitimate science, and he was the first American to study samples of the plague bacterium. On paper, there was no more qualified person to safeguard San Francisco from the plague. Prior to San Francisco, Kinyoun had been living the high society life in Washington, D.C., but there were disagreements and drama and jealousy with the U.S. Surgeon General Walter Wyman. So Kinyoun was banished to isolated Angel Island, San Francisco's quarantine station. He thought this post was beneath him, and backwater, and podunk, and there were only dummies practicing medicine in California. Surely that hubris would not come back to bite him in any way. Here on Angel Island, this cove is now called Ayala Cove, but it used to be called Hospital Cove, and it's the place where Kinyoun probably let the plague into San Francisco. It was a quarantine station, which means it was designed to make sure that people and goods infected with the plague did not get in. In June of 1899, the Nippon Maru anchored in San Francisco Bay. It was flying a yellow flag, which is the international symbol for disease aboard. Like baby on board, but less fun. The Nippon Maru had originated in Hong Kong, but had to stop in Yokohama, Japan and Honolulu, Hawaii because people were dying of the plague. 2 more passengers died before it made it to San Francisco. They also found 2 stowaways from the Nippon Maru floating dead in San Francisco Bay, wearing Nippon Maru life jackets, and the local health officials are like, well, we think they drowned, but they also look like they have the plague. But Kinyoun was like, no. I am the medicine. I am the authority. You local health officials don't know what you're talking about. I'm gonna let the boat and all the passengers into San Francisco. Welcome. This first time, Kinyoun may have gotten lucky, because despite the literal floating plague corpses, the disease didn't seem to infect the city. But then, about 6 months later, the Bubonic Plague infected Chinatown in Honolulu. Plague paranoia hit Honolulu so hard, they decided to burn down certain buildings where plague had been found. But the wind spread the fires, and all of Chinatown was engulfed. It burned for 17 days, leaving nothing behind but smoldering ruins. Honolulu was a mess. When he heard about this, Kinyoun became pensive, waiting for when, not if, the plague would make its way from Honolulu to San Francisco. For months, Kinyoun would gaze out on the ocean, vaguely in the direction of Hawaii, and wonder when the plague was coming to San Francisco. Which boat would be the boat? Which passenger would be patient zero? The city's first bacteriologist was called here to Wing Sang Coffin Shop to collect samples from Wong to take to Angel Island for Kinyoun to test. But while that was happening, the Board of Health issued an emergency measure to quarantine all of Chinatown. Wong's clothes and bedding were thrown into the street here and fumigated with pots of sulfur, and Wong was wrapped in a shroud dipped in bichloride of mercury before his body was placed in a lead coffin lined with chloride of lime. He was taken to the Oddfellows Cemetery, where his body was incinerated. Meanwhile, back at the Globe Hotel, residents fled, fearing that their home would be burned down just like in Honolulu. Instead, they were fumigated with sulfur and formaldehyde. It was said that the whole district smelled like rotten eggs. While all this is happening and the health officials and the residents of Chinatown are panicking, the white citizens of San Francisco barely batted an eye. That's because most people believed, including the governor, who we'll get to in a moment, that the plague was a Chinese disease.
The China plague.
This is what the Navy's Surgeon General said. It's a disease peculiar to the Orient and seldom, if ever, attacks Europeans. There's absolutely no danger of the plague getting here. I feel like if there's one thing we know, it's that the plague attacks Europeans, right? Like, it's the plague. Didn't it take out half the population of Europe?
This plague is bubonic, B-U-B-O-N-I-C.
While the Chinese in San Francisco prepared for the worst, a San Francisco Examiner headline read, "Why San Francisco is plague-proof." They also believed white people were immune to the plague because they ate lots of meat, and Chinese people ate rice.
The China plague.
So that's a reason. Back on Angel Island, it was going to take 3 days to get a conclusive diagnosis of the plague from Kinyoun. But instead of waiting 3 whittle days, the mayor of San Francisco, James Phelan, lifted the quarantine because he didn't think it was the plague. Plus, he was a slumlord who needed his Chinatown tenants to pay rent, so. But Kinyoun was already worried, and so he telegrammed Wyman, the Surgeon General in Washington, with a coded message: suspected bumpkin. Bumpkin being code for the plague. One day after the quarantine had already been lifted from Chinatown, Kinyoun confirmed that Wong had indeed died of the plague. During this time, volunteer doctors had been going door to door looking for plague victims, but they were encouraged not to find anything incriminating, thereby minimizing the chance of finding more plague. Oh, that bump there? That is what we call egg leg. That's not a plague, Bubo, to be sure. 1 week after Wong's death, and just after the Chronicle announced the bubonic scare has collapsed, the body of Chu Gam was found at 723 Sacramento Street, and Kinyoun confirmed that he had also died of the plague. That's 8 days, 2 plague deaths, quickly followed by 2 more suspected plague deaths. The authorities weren't the only ones trying to minimize the plague. The Chinese residents in Chinatown were terrified of what might happen to them should plague be found. Remember Chinatown and Honolulu getting burned down? So they began to hide both their living and dead with any symptoms. The Chinese didn't want there to be plague, the government didn't want there to be plague, the press didn't want there to be plague, so everyone just goes, no plague here. Just egg leg again. So many cases of egg leg this year. Until April 24th, May 1st, May 15th, May 17th, plague death, plague death, plague death, plague death. Then after that, 8 more people in a week. An experimental vaccine was brought out, the Halfkin serum. It was fine. It worked. Half the time. It's in the name. Riots and protests took over Chinatown. The Chinese did not want to be guinea pigs for this serum. Local Tongs, which are organizations that both protected and terrorized the Chinese in Chinatown, think a benevolent society, run by Tony Soprano, threatened violence to any Chinese who dared take the serum. And most white San Franciscans refused to take the vaccine because it was
the China Plague.
But word was slipping out that San Francisco was dealing with the plague. Texas and Louisiana threatened to quarantine all people and goods coming from California, a move which would have ruined the California economy. William Randolph Hearst, renowned newspaperman and shit disturber, published a headline, "The Black Plague Creeps into America." Kinyoun and the Board of Health had only one recourse. Here at the intersection of Kearny and Broadway is where the plague barriers were erected to keep Chinatown quarantined. Now, the California Board of Health wanted to burn Chinatown down, but they had to settle for just quarantining it. 8-foot-tall wooden fences, barbed wires, and 150 police officers surrounded Chinatown. No goods, services, people, food, or the dead could go in or out. Then there was the governor of California, Henry Gage, a rancher with a Bowie knife, a huge walrus mustache, and believed to be under the thumb of Big Railroad. Gage was widely disliked by voters and lawmakers alike. But most of all, Gage hated all of the plague press coverage and called it the plague fake. Can't make that up.
The plague fake.
Gage believed the plague was a conspiracy against his power and was furious that all this bad press would endanger $25 million of fruit crop earnings in California. To fight what he believed were conspiracies against him, he started more conspiracy theories, like saying that the microscope slides Kinyoun had from the San Francisco plague victims were secretly switched out for samples from Japan or India.
The plague fake.
Governor Gage was furious that doctors dared challenge his medical knowledge. He was not a doctor. He was a former sheep dealer. He refused to fund any sort of state quarantine and told the State Board of Health to withhold news and sanitation information from any other states.
The plague fake.
Gage had it out for Kinyoun specifically, seeing him as the plague's chief conspirator. Gage and the press constantly attacked him, calling him Suspicious Kinyoun. And Gage successfully made Kinyoun the villain of the San Francisco plague story. But Kinyoun had one final hope for the plague to be taken seriously. In January of 1901, a commission of scientists were sent from Washington, D.C. Of course, Governor Gage was not happy that D.C. had not let him personally choose the doctors, complaining that he had intended to pack it with doctors he considered allies.
The plague fake.
Plague, they wrote, was present beyond a possible doubt. Gage railed against the committee, accusing them of carelessness and contamination, calling the whole inquiry unjust and unfair. Here's where Gage was smart. He knew that Surgeon General Wyman also wanted to cover up the mishandling of the plague under his watch. So they secured a deal. San Francisco and California would have to pay for Chinatown's sanitation. And in return, Wyman and the federal government would never go public with the commission's findings of plague. California got to save its economy, and Wyman got to save face, and Gage got to dunk on Dr. Kinyoun. Speaking of Kinyoun, he was replaced with a man named Dr. Joseph White, and then he was demoted and transferred to Detroit. The most reviled man in San Francisco was sent packing with his tail between his legs. And for the time being, Governor Gage had won. Unfortunately, you can only cover things up for so long. The plague was still in San Francisco, let's not lose sight of that, and nobody could find any rhyme or reason to its spread. With Kinyoun ousted, who would save San Francisco? Drumroll, enter Dr. Rupert Blue. Rupert Blue was a young Southern man from a well-to-do military family. The rap on Blue pre-plague was that he was average. Not a great scientific brain like Kinyoun, just a nice guy with an easy-to-like way. Blue was sent to San Francisco to head up sanitation and find all those living plague victims that everyone had been hiding. But to be honest, Blue was really sent to San Francisco to fail, or at least hold the nothing to see here status quo under Kinyoun's replacement, Joseph White. Blue ended up surprising everyone. It was in this Merchant Street alley that Rupert Blue rented a small room to serve as a makeshift morgue, laboratory, and headquarters. He came to practically live here surrounded by the corpses. But the thing was, there weren't enough corpses. The people of Chinatown were still hiding them. Blue had to try several tactics. The first was his own private hearse service that went out to pick up the bodies and bring them back to him for autopsy. Second, Blue and his team had to build trust with the people of Chinatown. They started taking the half-kin serum themselves, which did not sound fun. It made them delirious and feverish, but it did build trust with the people. I'll take the serum, you take the serum, right? Blue also hired Wang Chung, the man who had previously been so vital in helping the Plague Commission find bodies. Wang could explain the Chinese culture to Blue, and then Blue could in turn be more sensitive to their needs. It was this trust being built that allowed more bodies to be revealed. But then in the fall of 1900, something happened that changed everything. 2 white plague victims outside of Chinatown, 50-year-old Alexander Winters and 53-year-old Marguerite Sago. Winters survived, but Sago did not. Blue had to rack his brain what in the world connected Winters, Sago, and Chinatown. There's a car coming, so I have to do my dramatic reveal. It was rats. It was rats. Rats. It was rats. 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 It was rats. It was rats. Rats were everywhere in 1900s San Francisco. Rats are still everywhere. There's probably a rat near you right now. Check under the couch, seriously. Rats are the most common mammal in the world and are built to survive. They can find food anywhere, smell poison down to the parts per million, squish through an opening the size of their skull, survive a 50-foot fall, breed like crazy, jump 4 feet in the air, and swim better than you. Rats are great. Unfortunately, they're also very good at carrying the plague. Well, they aren't. Their fleas are. The bubonic plague is zoonotic, a disease that can be spread between animals and people. Say a rat gets the plague. Fleas on that rat will bite it and suck up all that yummy rat plague blood. Then the flea jumps to the next closest blood bag, maybe you, a human, and bites you and gives you the plague. Rupert Blue has been obsessed with the plague, working nonstop. His marriage is over. He can't figure out the connection between rats and the plague, even though he knows there is one, and he feels like a failure. So he requests a transfer away to Milwaukee to clear his head. But when Blue leaves, San Francisco descends into chaos. The city health inspectors are in cahoots with Governor Gage and just stop attending the autopsies of plague victims. The powerful companies in Chinatown are still refusing to cooperate and hiding bodies and lying about autopsy results. But then San Francisco gets a new mayor. Amazing. Finally, we've been waiting for this. Oh, cool. He's a plague denier who believes the plague never existed in the first place. Great. That guy, Handsome Gene Schmitz, takes the funding away from the Board of Health and stops any sanitation efforts in the city. With garbage and rats piling up, the plague goes away. No, obviously not. It's 1902 and the plague is surging. Rupert Blue is gone, and poor Wang Chung, his counterpart in Chinatown, is still desperately trying to keep tracking the plague and saving lives, even though both white officials and Chinese company bosses are against him. Someone even tries to kill him. Finally, it's getting so bad that the federal government, remember the folks who agreed to help California cover up the plague? They send in another investigator who sends back one line. Please send Blue as soon as possible. In February of 1903, Rupert Blue returned to San Francisco after being gone 14 months. People are dying, other states are threatening to refuse imports from California, and Blue is back with a mission. Stone cold rat killer. Blue immediately puts a sanitation plan into effect in Chinatown. Disinfectant through the streets, soaking basements with carbolic acid, mercury dichloride, and lye, and paving streets for street sweepers. But he now believed the most important task was rat catching. Autopsying rats became his lab's primary purpose. He even paid freelance rat trappers 10 cents a rat, dead or alive. How's that for a gig economy job? Each rat would be nailed to a roof shingle, autopsied, and then incinerated. And you know what? Blue's rat crusade actually started to work. While cases still appeared, they began to dwindle. And that may have been the end of the story if... Wait, what was that other thing about San Francisco in 1906? Oh, right. In April of 1906, an earthquake registering a magnitude of 7.9 hit San Francisco. 80% of the city was destroyed, over 3,000 people killed, 400,000 residents left homeless. It's still the deadliest natural disaster in California's history. Over 35,000 people made their way to parks like the Presidio, and refugee tent cities sprang up. The close quarters of these tent cities caused one small problem. Can you guess what it was? I'll just tell you, it was the plague. The camps were rat heaven. Rotting food, human waste, poor hygiene. Rupert Blue was sent into the fray and immediately began sanitizing the cooking and the toilets and burning garbage and killing rats like Rupert Blue likes to do. Wyman, the Surgeon General, believed that Blue had done it again, yes, king, and sent him away back to Virginia. But within a year, the plague had returned again. It's getting exhausting. When Blue returned to San Francisco in the summer of 1907, it was a city in disarray. The plague was everywhere, except, ironically, Chinatown, which was the only place in the city that was mostly ratless. Rat-free. Sans rat. Blue obtained a house here at 401 Fillmore Street to turn into central headquarters for rat eradication. Rats were brought here and piled up to be dissected assembly line style. If a rat was thought to have the plague, its tissues would be cultured, and those cells injected into guinea pigs to confirm the diagnosis, and then the rats would be incinerated. Blue and his team began to call this place the Rattery. I wonder if these people here now know that they live in the most iconic rat slaughter and dissection location in American history. But while Blue and his team were killing more rats than ever, at least 13,000 per week, the plague continued to appear all over the city. If Blue was going to beat this most virulent incarnation of the San Francisco bubonic plague, citizens were going to have to commit to actually changing their habits and giving some consideration to their fellow San Franciscans. Catch a rat, save a human. It seems so simple. Plus, the Great White Fleet was coming. The Great White Fleet was an armada of 16 US Navy ships that were sailing around the world, essentially showing off America's military and economic power. Coming to San Francisco would prove that the city was back, baby, after the earthquake, even if it wasn't, and back after the plague, even if it wasn't. But if San Francisco couldn't get its act together, the armada would go up to Seattle instead. Ooh, burn. All these big corporations like Wells Fargo, Levi Strauss, the Southern Pacific Railroad got together and decided to privately fund Blue's rat killing and public health campaign. Blue now had an extra 400 workers catching and killing rats in the streets, plus 3,000 pounds of cheese for the task of rat catching. Why didn't we think of cheese before? There was also a committee that was offering 25 cents per every male rat and 50 cents for every female rat. In 2020 dollars, that's $3.29 for male rats and $6.58 for female rats. Citizens went rat wild. Boys roamed the streets in rat killing squads. The press published pieces about rat killing best practices. Blue wasn't quite ready to celebrate. But with pressure, he relented and gave the city a clean bill of health. On May 6, 1908, the Great White Fleet made it to the Golden Gate, ushering in a new era for San Francisco. By fall of that year, Blue really had done it. He had beaten the plague in San Francisco. But what is our takeaway? Is it that we learned our lesson about the handling of the spread of disease?
And this is their new hoax. And the risk to the American people remains very low. It's going to be under control. It's like a miracle. It will disappear. I'll be right eventually.
No, it's not that. But I won't leave you on such a dire note. If history has proven anything, it's that despite the guys in charge throwing up roadblocks and the masses being in denial, we have triumphed before. If Blue and the Rat Squad can kill hundreds of thousands of rats and stop the literal plague, we can, I don't know, wear a mask? This video was made with generous donations from death enthusiasts just like you. It's just obviously a plant. Hold on. Ooh!
Ah, medieval Bluetooth speaker.
Get a latte when I'm done.
When I'm done, I get a latte. Oh.
Vibrato. That's why I get paid the big bucks. The bubonic plague in America.
The bubonic plague in America.
The bubonic plague. That one's a little too throaty. Can you hear that extreme, like, that's sawing? They must just be sawing a man's corpse to hide his body. The world is so loud. The Navy's Surgeon General said, I feel like my bangs are bad, but they're not bad. It's a good bang day. I want the film to reflect that. Wells Fargo, Levi Strauss, the Southern Pacific Railroad. And he was furious that all this Brad press. Hey guys, we have a real problem with all this Brad press. Dang, Brad, stop with all this press. Enter Dr. Rupert Blair. Why would I use that voice? Suck up all that yummy rat plague blood. And suck up all that yummy rat plague blood. Yummy rat plague blood. My little mouth is getting tired. Oh, it's pooping. We love nature. Sir, it was rats.